So those of you that are joining us now and want to go back and watch the recording, it will be sent out tomorrow via the regular kind of portal I use or my newsletter. I also will send out a link via the Zoom because last time some were getting snagged into spam or weren't getting delivered into the right folders or locations just based on the email server. So I want to make sure you get it. If you don't have it from me tomorrow, check your spam, check your junk, and then email me if you don't have it. And I'm happy to re-forward it on to you, but you should have it all the way here soon. So should work out really well. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and talk real briefly about a couple quick things, and then we're going to turn it over to the man of the hour, Mr. Bennett himself. Excuse me. So let me start my screen share. All right, we're off to the races. So I want to say thanks for those of you that coming back out. We have some first timers. This is the first time you've been part of the speaker series. We have a lot of you that have registered for the entire series, which we'll talk about briefly at the end. And I want to say welcome. My name is Nick Stover. I'm the founder of Nature Photography Classes. And I'm excited to bring Eric Bennett to you today and to talk a lot about what he's going to bring forth. Eric's been instrumental in a big part of my journey. All the way through my creative process, going back, I guess, over 5 years now. Geez, dating ourselves all the way through. But this is exciting. So I had founded Nature Photography Classes about a year ago, actually, a little over a year ago, or a little less. And that's to help nature photographers who are interested in deeper connections create more impactful images so they can confidently and consistently express themselves. So this is the mission in the classes I teach, the workshops I do. And in the case of the speaker series as well, where I'm really focusing on the speakers we've cultivated and brought in to talk to you tonight is to help in that deeper connection part and piece of your work. So we as photographers, as creatives, we're always searching and working for different type of connections to ourselves, connections to other photographers, connections to that natural environment. And for me, Eric really embodies a huge portion of that in his work. Eric's work also represents that consistency and that confidence in how he expresses himself. So one of the things I've always admired about Eric is the consistency in his processing and the way he works and how he sees his environment. So I'm really excited to bring Eric forth to talk with you today. I'm going to stop my share before I do, excuse me, to talk about his book just really quick and read one quick excerpt from it. So Eric's book here, Conversations with Nature. For those of you that do or don't know me, I have a massive amount of photo books. This is definitely one of my favorites, top 5 of them on there. And this is from his section on mountains. And I love this. And he says, there is something about being in the midst of these giants that not only teaches us more about them, but about ourselves as well. From their immense size, we learn of our own smallness, not only here on Earth, but within this inconceivably vast universe. So with those thoughts kind of in mind, I'm now going to turn over the next hour or so to Eric to talk about exclusion and how he looks about the process of his compositions and his creative process as well, which is going to be really exciting. Put your questions into the Q&A. We're going to have at least a half an hour kind of at the tail end to answer his questions, anything and everything on the creative process as well, and all the way through. And with that, I turn it over to you, Mr. Eric Bennett.
Thanks a lot, Nick. I really appreciate you having me be a part of this series, especially with so many other great photographers. For those that attended for the last session, it's kind of intimidating to have to follow up after Mark Adamus, who's been he's an absolute legend, and I've admired him since day one. So hopefully I won't disappoint you guys that watched that session. Yeah, Nick, it's been great to get to know you a little bit over the last, I can't believe it's been 5 years already, but it's been great to work with you. And I love seeing where your photography has arrived to now, and the vision that you have now and how you've evolved and everything. I love answering questions, you guys. So please fire away during the presentation. If anything comes up, don't hesitate to ask. We should have plenty of time for that at the end. So Tonight I decided to talk about probably the most important part of composition. And for me, composition is one of the most crucial aspects of nature photography. And admittedly, I've given this same presentation before a couple of years ago in another conference, but I've made some revisions, put in some new image examples, and made some changes because this is a topic that I am constantly learning about as well. And I feel like I'm constantly trying to improve my compositions and be able to, I'm always trying to be able to convey what I want to convey through my photographs more. And that's the value that wilderness has and the love that I have for it, so that other people can appreciate it as well and see why it's important that we keep these places protected and why the last few wild places that we still have on this planet are so important to us. So for those of you that aren't familiar with my work, I always like to start out just by going through a few photographs. That way you can kind of get an idea of the kind of photographer I am and my love for nature and my passion for nature photography. I love to backpack in the mountains. I've traveled all over the world, but over the last few years, especially with the pandemic and everything kind of forcing us to stay around home, I've started to focus more on the mountain ranges of the Rocky Mountains closer to where I live in Utah. And I also love the desert in southern Utah, mainly for all of the intimate scenes that you can find there. There are lots of incredible scenes of mud or oil or fallen leaves or sandstone. A lot of things that to others might appear very ordinary, but with certain kind of lighting or the certain kind of perspective that you can have of them, they can appear extraordinary. And that's something that I really enjoy, making people see the world through my eyes and showing things that might seem mundane or ordinary to someone else and showing them in a way that makes them appreciate them more because they learned something about them. And that's one of the powers that photography has. I love photographing the aspens near my home as well in Utah in the fall, especially. It's a tree that I've come to love tremendously. Love photographing forests. I feel like forests and tree scenes are an endless challenge, and there's always so much variety. Every time you go out and shoot, it's different and you can find different kinds of scenes. Never seems to get redundant like other subjects can. All right. So practicing the art of exclusion. When it comes to composition, over the years, I have learned that what we exclude from our frame is much more important than what we choose to include. And I've been practicing nature photography full time for the last 7 years, going on my 8th year now. And when I first started out, I remember always having my wide angle lens basically glued to my camera. And I was always trying to include everything around me. And sometimes I'd even make these big wide panoramas in order to try to fit the entire scene into the frame and show everything that was in front of me all at once. But if we try to include too many things within the frame, it can be kind of like a story with too many characters, or if we're telling somebody a story we include too many details, the point of the story can get lost and it can lose its central focus. And when it comes to photography, if you don't have a strong subject or people can't tell what the most important thing is within the frame, then the photograph becomes a photograph about nothing. And it's really not telling any kind of a story. It's just more of a snapshot. It's just more of a documentation of a place. And I think you can be really artistic as well by what you choose to exclude. And one of my favorite things to do with photographs, like I was saying before, I love photographing ordinary objects and trying to make them look extraordinary by creative decisions with composition and lighting. And by omitting certain facts and excluding certain things, not showing the entire scene in front of you, and being a bit more concise, you can actually create a lot of mystery, which will make scenes appear much more interesting than they would in real life if you were seeing everything around it, or maybe in a photograph that included all of the clues and context around it as well. So we're always practicing exclusion in photography because there's no way we can fit the entire world into the frame. So no matter what, we're always going to be excluding certain things. It's just a matter of doing it more deliberately and excluding things on purpose in order to create certain visual effects or create a stronger scene. So when you want to practice the art of exclusion, what it comes down to first and foremost is determining what the subject of the photograph is. So when you're out looking for photographs, you're in a place that you've traveled to do some photography, it's so important to have in mind what it is that you want to show. So instead of looking at the entire scene as a whole, maybe identify a certain element of the scene, a certain object, a certain area that's being hit by a small beam of light, or a specific tree or a specific mountain peak that speaks to you the most. And this is what the photograph is going to be about. So whatever it is that makes you excited to take the photograph in the first place, that's what the photograph should be about. And the more precise you can be with that, the easier the process of creating a composition is going to be in return. And so once you identify what it is specifically that you want to show in a photograph, that you want to convey, then you can start to think about what else could be included around it that will help it to stand out and help it to look better. Maybe if it's a mountain peak, it'll make it look even bigger and more imposing. Or if it's a lone tree, by including some empty space around it, it'll make it seem even more lonely. And it will just amplify that feeling or the subject of the scene that you want to convey in the photograph. So it's really important to think about visual hierarchy. Every single photograph should have one thing in it, or one part of it, one area of it that is more important than everything else. And so the way you include things should reflect that. You don't want to include anything that dominates your subject or draws attention away from it. Rather, you only want to include things that help it to look better and draw attention towards it. And then the next thing to think about is what should be left out of the frame. And sometimes the subject can look much better all on its own without any kinds of other things included around it, without having any kind of context or any other objects that surround it, just isolating it all on its own. And this is something super important to understand that took me a long time to realize, that you can actually shoot a subject all by itself and still create a very compelling photograph that will be interesting and intriguing. You don't always need to pack in more and more and more in order to make it more interesting. So some examples of these would be subjects that are very subtle. So you don't want to include anything else around it because it's very subtle, and anything else will only detract from it. So like with this scene here, what drew me to this and what made me excited to pull my camera out and point my camera down at the ground to shoot this were the little rings of the alkali on these rocks near a river in the desert. And so I knew in order to be able to showcase that and make it clear so that people could appreciate it and amplify it enough, I would have to zoom in and exclude everything else around it. There were badlands next to this. There were mud cracks. There were trees. There was a stream. But even though a lot of those things were undeniably beautiful, none of them would complement this, because by the time I shot this wide enough to be able to include anything else around it, you would no longer be able to see this thing that I wanted to showcase here, which created this nice, interesting pattern on these colorful rocks. So maybe the subject should be isolated all on its own because it's very small. Maybe everything else around it is so much bigger that it will only dwarf it, and that will cause it to be lost in the scene as a whole. So this was a small little puddle I found in the mountains, and it had this amazing pattern created by these oils that had formed on its surface from decaying plant matter and freezing temperatures overnight that caused it to harden and become more concentrated and kind of make these little tiles of oil on the surface. This was a tiny puddle, and I had to zoom all the way in with my 300mm telephoto lens in order to even see it. So this was a case where it worked really well to exclude everything else around the subject and shoot it all by itself. It didn't need anything else in order to look better or be more compelling. Rather, it looks much better all on its own because you can actually appreciate it. And also seeing it like this, it's actually larger than it was in real life. So because of the zoom lens that I use and the closer perspective, you can appreciate it even more that way. Another reason you should isolate a subject all by itself and not include anything else around it is maybe because of its placement. So maybe it's down on the ground and the mountains in the background or the canyon walls are just too high up where you really can't work out a perspective to include both things. It's kind of in an awkward position. Maybe it's in the corner of a canyon. Maybe it's just in an area where there isn't really anything else around it to include into a cohesive composition. So you can just shoot it all by itself. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's not necessary to include lots of secondary characters and lots of other elements. You can just simplify things down to the bare bones, and the bare minimum a lot of the time can be completely, it can be interesting enough, or sometimes it can be even more interesting that way and more compelling, more intriguing for the viewer. So exclusion actually draws attention to things more than inclusion. So you can include leading lines, you can include framing, maybe with some trees or some branches or something like that, that help draw the eye towards a specific area of the scene and stuff like that. That's all very effective. But what's even more effective is by giving the viewer nothing else to look at, by excluding everything else. That is the most effective way you can cause somebody to look exactly where you want them to within the frame. You don't give them any other options. So when I was in this really busy rainforest in New Zealand with all these mossy trees, I really liked the shape of this tree and all that was created by all of its branches that was accentuated by this strong, harsh backlight in the middle of the day. But when I included other trees around it, you really couldn't see that. You couldn't see this nice pattern created by the lines of these branches, and it just didn't come through in the same way as it does here, where I've just excluded everything else. I don't even give you a choice. There's only one thing to look at, and that's the subject. Or this scene of some rippled mud on the shore of a beach getting hit by golden light at the end of the day. I just loved the gold and blue pattern here, and the best way to showcase that was just by shooting it all on its own, making it bigger by zooming in and not giving you anything else to look at. This is the only thing I wanted you to see in that scene. Or here, the base of this hoodoo in Escalante. I just loved how this particular part of it looked strangely alive. It kind of looks like tentacles, kind of looks like it's organic, like an animal or something like that. And it doesn't resemble sandstone or mudstone as much. It's not the first thing that comes to mind. And that's accentuated by excluding everything else around it. So this is the only thing you can look at. I'm forcing you to see what I want you to see. So when you're out photographing, I know I used to always be looking for lots of secondary elements, lots of things like foregrounds, patterns to put in the foreground, maybe some wildflowers, stuff like that. And that can definitely work, but it doesn't always work. So it's super important to be mindful of when those things will complement a scene, or when a scene will actually be complemented by being completely isolated all on its own, and maybe just having one plane and not having a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. This is where intimate photography like this became a lot more straightforward for me. When I understood the best way to frame these kinds of scenes in order for them to be appreciated fully. So something I always stress is that less is more. You can add more to a scene by subtracting rather than by trying to add more and more and more in order to make it more interesting. So through exclusion, you can just make your subject impossible to ignore. The scene isn't going to be confusing. People aren't going to be questioning what the central focus is or what it's about, because it's not about anything else. It's only about the subject, and you haven't included anything else. There's nothing else to look at. So it's always important to keep in mind the power you have by using exclusion to really draw the attention towards the most important part of the frame, the thing it is that you want to make a photograph about. So while exclusion is super effective at drawing attention to the subject of a scene, there are also lots of other effects that can be created through exclusion if you're creative enough. So one of the things that I love to do in order to make a photo more interesting than it maybe was in actuality or would have been by some other kind of composition that includes more is to eliminate context. So in this scene here, with this perspective where I'm really zoomed in on these tree trunks, they become a lot less literal because you can't really see where they are. You'd have no idea where I took this photo, where in the world it was. Maybe you'd have some clues based on the species of pine tree that you can see here, if you can distinguish that. But without that context, also you can see in this one, there's a lot of compression. So there's no space between the trees. They're all compressed together. There's no gaps or anything like that. And so the feeling of this scene is that the forest is very crowded. It's very dense, and in actuality, it wasn't, but I've excluded that context so you don't know any better. You can only know what I've shown you here. There aren't any other clues about the scene. And it can be kind of disorienting, which I think makes it more interesting because it's hard to tell which tree is in front of which. And that can cause somebody to engage with it for more time and spend more time with it trying to figure that out. It just makes it more interesting. Or this scene here, it's hard to tell where I shot it because it doesn't give enough information about the location. The light is also a lot more interesting than it was in reality because I've excluded the light source, and I only included these layers of slot canyon, which makes it kind of hard to, again, it's kind of disorienting. It's hard to tell which one is in front of which, and it makes it a lot more abstract that way. It's a lot less literal by, things will be less literal by excluding the context, and the less information you give about it, the more abstract it's going to be. So another thing I love to do, which is kind of part of hiding context, is to hide the scale of a subject. So in this scene here, a lot of people have a hard time determining what it is and also its size. So I've actually had a lot of people say that it looks like an aerial, and they ask if I photographed it from a plane thousands of feet up above it. Some people ask, if it was really small and it's a super macro scene. I won't really give it away, but it's neither. And that's because I've excluded other objects that would be recognizable that would give away its scale. There's nothing to compare it to. So you don't know if these little rivers of light are large or small, and that's going to make somebody spend more time with the image trying to figure that out. And they're going to, I think it becomes a lot more interesting that way. This is another one where it's hard to tell if this is a large scene or a small scene, because all you can see is the patches of snow and the ice and the water in between. I haven't included anything else that somebody could know the size of, like a rock or a tree branch or a leaf or anything like that. So it's really just up for interpretation. It's not, the answer isn't given to the viewer. It makes them ask questions rather than just answering all of them. There's another one where there's just no other objects to give away the scale. Can't tell if it's big or small. So with a lot of us being, well, I guess now we can travel quite a bit and we can do things a lot more freely. But for a year or two there, we had to spend most of our time, if we wanted to do any photography, near our houses. And some of us don't live in the most interesting areas. So I'm lucky enough to live in Utah, where I do have a lot of great places close by. But even for me, for a good 6 months or so, a lot of the national parks and stuff around here were closed, and I had to stay within my county. But I still wanted to go out on hikes and be in nature, and that inevitably always makes me want to create photographs. So the power of exclusion is that even if you're not in the most interesting place in the world, you can still create interesting photographs by deliberately excluding things. And even if you're in your backyard or on the side of the road, if you exclude those facts and those details, if you omit those things about the scene, people would never know otherwise. So this scene here, I feel like when you look at it, it feels like a very wild grove of aspens. It might feel like I had to travel a long time to get here, that it's very remote and far away from any people or highways or anything like that. But the reality is that it was just photographed right off the side of the road. So I was just driving my car through a mountain canyon near home. And yes, there are very unique conditions here. The snow is very beautiful with the peak fall color that you can see here. And that is somewhat rare and uncontrollable. But if I had photographed this any wider, you would have seen a guardrail and a highway, maybe some passing cars, maybe some people walking around. But by excluding all of those things, it makes this scene appear a lot more remote and wild than it was in actuality. So it makes it even more interesting and more impressive and thought-provoking and evocative. So it's really important to understand that power that you have by excluding things. You can create these completely new places that don't actually exist in reality. You're not as confined by where you can travel, and you're not limited to the places that you are actually in. You can create new places altogether. This scene of interesting patterns in a small patch of ice is one of my personal favorites. But again, it wasn't in a remarkable location. I photographed this after sunrise, just late morning while I was hiking with my friend back to our campsite. And there happened to be this small, it was a really cold night. So there happened to be this small puddle that was completely frozen, but it was right in the middle of the busiest trail. So there were tons of people walking by all morning, and a lot of it was actually trampled and very muddy and not so aesthetically pleasing as this small patch was. But by just zooming in and isolating this all on its own, it appears maybe much more special or extraordinary than it was in actuality. It was just a puddle in the middle of a muddy trail that people were trampling through, but you'd have no idea unless I told you that. It's not shown here at all. This scene that I photographed in Iceland, I was at a very popular lake and I was standing on the shore next to maybe 100 other people that were taking photos, selfies. It was very noisy, a lot of commotion around me, but I was able to zoom in and isolate this Nunatak, that mountain peak coming out of the glacier, with these waterfalls and glaciers and atmosphere around it. That shows none of that. It doesn't show the people around me. It doesn't show any of that. It reflects something completely different. And that's all because I excluded those things. Something else that I use a lot in my photography is the illusion that a certain scene goes on forever. So I do this a lot with pattern scenes that, by the way that I frame it, it appears that the pattern continues on forever and forever and forever, and it never ends. And this is done by excluding the edges of the pattern. So in this scene here of these icicles hanging from the ceiling of an ice cave, I don't show where they end. So it looks like there are just layers and layers and layers and layers of icicles that go on forever, because I don't show where it actually finishes. And so the imagination just assumes that it goes on forever. There is no end in sight. And that makes it feel like it's much grander than it was in reality, makes it feel like it's much more special and extraordinary, a lot more remarkable than it actually was. And in this scene as well, it's hard to tell the scale, if these icicles are large or if they're small. They could be super tiny or they could be huge. You just don't know, because there's nothing to compare them to in order to determine their size. And that's also done by the practicing the art of exclusion here. This photograph of these starfish all holding together on this rock, you can't see the starfish on the edges are overlapping, so they continue out of the frame. And that also makes you wonder if there were more starfish and how many starfish there were in total. In reality, there were just maybe a few more outside of the frame, and it ended. It was just bare rock after that. But since I don't show that, you would never know, and your imagination becomes engaged and it assumes that it continues on forever. Here with these Badlands, I don't show where they finish. I don't show the beginning of them or the end of them. So it might make you think that it's just this expansive area of super colorful rainbow Badlands, that this kind of formation just continues on forever. In reality, it was just a small section of Badlands that was like this. All the rest of the Badlands around it were much more brown and monochromatic. They didn't have these blue stripes or purple stripes or these rainbow colors like you see here. But since I don't show that, it can make you feel like it goes on forever and it's a much greater area than it was in reality. These layers of glacier that repeat over and over again. They go right off the edges. So again, it just appears like it goes on forever. So this is something you can do to make ordinary scenes appear extraordinary, make small things appear much larger than they were, and in turn make photographs that are more interesting and much more remarkable. So you're just not restricted by where you actually go or what you're actually seeing. If you frame it in a certain way, you can engage the viewer's imagination and make them see even more than what is actually there, make them feel more than what is actually there. So it's a great thing to do with patterns. If you show where it ends, there is no mystery, there are no questions, and people will know exactly how large it was or wasn't. And it's just an easy thing to do to make something a lot more interesting, I feel like, and visually engaging. Something else that can be done through exclusion is if you exclude the sky or the light source, this gives you a lot of freedom, especially with post-processing and while you're shooting with the exposure that you choose for the scene. So when you exclude the sky, you have the freedom to make darker scenes much brighter than they were. You have the freedom to make bright scenes darker than they were, because there's no reference as to how the light actually was. As soon as you include the sky, you make the scene a lot more literal, because people can see exactly what time of day it was. They can see the quality of light. They can see where the sun is or wasn't. And so, for example, if you're shooting a scene in twilight and it's really dark out, you're going to have to leave it dark, because if you try to brighten the landscape brighter than the sky and it doesn't match that reference of how the light was, then it's just going to become a distraction. And it's going to be a hard image to look at. So, for example, here, when I photographed these snowy aspens last year, this was actually a really dark, gloomy day. It was dumping snow, and it was towards the end of the day, so there wasn't any sunlight out. It wasn't bright. But with snow scenes, I really like the high key look, where you don't have super dark shadows, you don't have intense contrast. And so I was able to shoot this at a super bright exposure to bring those gray tones of the snow up to the white point and make everything as bright as it could go, because you can't see the sky anywhere. And there's not this crazy dynamic range that is going to limit me to how bright I can expose a scene, and also with post-processing later on, brighten it further. This dune scene in Death Valley, I photographed at twilight, maybe an hour after sunset. So everything was very cool and blue. There weren't really any warm tones because there was no sunlight hitting anything. And it was pretty dark out. I think I had to use a headlamp when I hiked back, but I was able to do like a 30-second exposure of this dune with this tight, intimate composition that excluded the light source, and make it a high key scene, which I feel is much more interesting. You can appreciate the details, and it's a lot more visually pleasing and compelling that way. This is another one where I was photographing these aspens at the end of the day. So it was really dark out again, and I was able to make it look high key by shooting it at a long exposure and exposing it a lot brighter than it was in reality. And it just makes it, a lot easier to look at, a lot easier to appreciate the details, and amplifies everything that I wanted to show a lot more. So, it's really important to understand when including the sky is going to actually benefit a scene, because even if the sky is like a blazing sunrise or sunset, you have clouds getting hit by super colorful, intense light, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to help draw more attention towards your subject. In fact, a lot of the time, those really crazy dramatic skies, depending on the subject matter, can actually just dilute it and detract from the subject. They can be more of a distraction rather than something that benefits the scene and draws the eye where you want it to go. So a lot of the time, I just exclude the sky or the light source completely, because it just gives me a lot more freedom to be creative with how I shoot the scene and how I process it later on. I'm not stuck to a certain kind of exposure or brightness or tonality or color palette or anything like that, because there is no reference as to how it actually was. So really, including the sky can be more of a limitation, I would say, in most cases, than something that actually enhances an image. And that took me years to figure out. But once it did, it completely changed how I saw the world and the kinds of scenes that I was able to create. So this was a clear day, just, boring blue sky day, like a lot of people would say. But by panning down and focusing on the floor of this forest that was covered in snow and leaves, and only showing the tree trunks here, not showing any sky or anything like that, I was able to brighten this light a lot and make it more intense and accentuate the shadows on the snow and make it feel much more interesting and epic in a way than it was in reality. So just by shifting that perspective, zooming in a little bit further and excluding the light source, it can make this ordinary lighting look a lot more interesting than it was. Or in this scene here of this hillside of trees, there are just these little patches of light, these little spotlights hitting the trees, which isn't the most common lighting. And by zooming in, it just accentuates those even more. If I had shot it wider, you'd be seeing a little bit of blue sky. It'd be kind of changing the feeling of the scene. And these spotlights would have gotten a lot smaller and they wouldn't have been as amplified. So you can magnify these little light rays and little pieces of light on the landscape by zooming in on them and excluding everything else around them. Also, if there was more intense light outside of the frame, but I included that, then it would diminish the quality of light that you see here in these softer patches of light. There's another scene that I photographed on a boring blue sky morning, but you can't see the sky here, so you can't see that. All you can see is this backlight illuminating these yellow aspen leaves, and then the shaded background that really makes them pop out. And so even though it's ordinary lighting, I feel like this scene is very interesting because they appear like fireflies. It appears like they're dancing now. They appear like maybe like little lights, and it's just a lot less literal this way. And I was able to accentuate that contrast even more, because if I had included the sky, I couldn't have brightened it this much and made it feel like it was really glowing like I did in post-processing. There's a similar effect here. To me, this scene resembled like swarming bees more than it did leaves on aspen trees. And that's because of the lighting being emphasized through a tighter composition that excludes all the other kinds of lighting around it that were much more ordinary. So even on boring normal days where the lighting isn't doing anything that's objectively interesting, you can find little pieces of the landscape where the light is interacting with it in more interesting ways and just isolate it all on its own so you can amplify that and emphasize it. One last thing that you can do with exclusion that is super important is enhance the mood of a scene. So a lot of people think that moody scenes are created through either really interesting, crazy, dramatic conditions like fog and interesting light and clouds and atmosphere, or by crazy state-of-the-art post-processing techniques. But really, I feel like mood comes from composition more than anything. And a lot of the time, tension, a lot of these emotions, it can come from hiding facts, hiding certain things rather than showing them, because it causes someone to wonder, and it can make things appear more extraordinary than they actually were. So this is a great example here of a telephoto scene that I shot in Patagonia a few years ago. And on this, this photo, it comes off as very dramatic, very intense. This huge mountain peak with atmosphere around it and dappled light, these little pieces of light hitting it. But the morning didn't feel like that at all when I was there in person. It was actually almost completely blue sky, and there were just a few small little clouds blowing around this mountain peak that were coming off the glacier behind it. So by isolating that all on its own, it makes it feel like it was that way in the entire place that morning. But that's a completely different story than what was happening in reality. So in this scene, I was getting dramatic lighting. There were very interesting conditions, but they wouldn't have looked nearly as interesting if I had shot it at a wider perspective, because it wouldn't have been as amplified. And also there would have been other conditions like blue sky that give off very peaceful feelings around it that would have been contradicting. So by only including what enhanced this mood of, this dramatic feeling, this intensity, the grandness of this mountain peak, it just amplifies that even more. Or this scene here, I feel like it it gives off the mood that this starfish is clinging on for its dear life as it's being battered by these waves on this rock. But really, this was just a peaceful morning, overcast day, no crazy conditions, weren't really any waves at all. Every once in a while, they would make it high enough to splash on this rock and then trickle down over this starfish. But by zooming in and only showing what you see here, you can't tell what kind of a day it was. So I created a completely new moment that didn't actually happen in reality. So you can get so creative and artistic by practicing exclusion to do all of these different things and focus more on what you're keeping out of the frame rather than what you're including. This scene here, again, there weren't clouds in the entire sky, just this small patch of sky here above these mountain peaks. And this dappled light appears a lot more interesting because I didn't include the larger patches of super bright sunlight that were around it. I just isolated this area of the scene where this kind of lighting was happening all on its own to give off that emotion and nothing else that would contradict it or dilute it. So by having the same quality of lighting from edge to edge in a scene, it can make it, it can enhance it and make it appear even more pronounced than it was in reality. This scene here with these wildflowers, it gives off this feeling of peace and calmness that I really like. So it's the opposite of the other examples I just showed you. And this was done by not showing the dark clouds that were giving this soft diffused light down below, just photographing these flowers all on their own. And then I was able to brighten it a lot by excluding that light source as well. So that gives it a brighter, more inviting feeling when it was actually kind of a stormy, dramatic day. So this is the opposite of that. You can make scenes appear much more calm and peaceful than they were in reality as well by practicing exclusion. And like I mentioned before, these flowers appear like they go on forever because you can't see where they end either. So the imagination just assumes that it keeps going and going and going. You can see in this scene, there's a small little beam of light hitting this waterfall, which I think really is the icing on the cake in this one. And I actually walked past this scene morning after morning on my way to another area in this mountain range in Patagonia, trying to shoot this lake with the mountain peaks above it and dramatic lighting. And that wouldn't pan out every single day. So I kept returning time and time again. And I would see this waterfall, but I never stopped to shoot it until this particular day when I saw this small little beam of light that was going through the tree branches at this certain angle. And then also there were some clouds diffusing it. So it was giving it a bit more shape so that it would only highlight this small area of the scene. And then by zooming in, that light becomes bigger because it becomes magnified and it appears like maybe it was the only piece of light that day in the entire landscape. You don't have any context to tell you otherwise. So it appears much more special and a lot more remarkable that way. It doesn't appear so ordinary. With this scene of these rocks on the coast at twilight, with some starfish clinging onto them, it appears, really moody. It's got that cool tone that makes it appear a little bit more, it's less inviting. It's a little more melancholic. And that's all done through the composition because if I had shown more around this, it would have felt completely different. It would have given off a completely different vibe than you can see here. So just showing these rough rocks and that misty water created through a very long exposure, it gives off the mood that I wanted to convey. That was a bit more melancholic and less exciting than the rest of the landscape was around it that evening. This is one of my favorite quotes. Photography is an art of observation. It's about finding something interesting in an ordinary place. I found it has little to do with the things you see and everything to do with the way you see them. So I feel like that perfectly sums up everything that I wanted to share tonight. And the main way that I approach photography, which is heavily focused on composition and lighting and how to make things that maybe 1,000 people pass every single day appear much more interesting and make people stop and actually look at them and appreciate them a lot more. And this is how you can teach people about nature, show them things that they wouldn't be able to see otherwise, and create personal photography. And by doing that, you have a unique contribution to the world. You make a unique contribution by creating photographs that nobody else could. And I feel like this is only a good thing. Both in terms of if you want to stand out as a photographer, because nobody else is going to have images like you. And also it makes photography a lot more fun and enjoyable because you're less restricted by weather conditions and lighting, time of day, and the places that you're in, because it's all about the way you see them and making them look more interesting rather than just photographing things that are inherently interesting. So it really just allows the imagination to run wild. It makes us think things that maybe aren't true and makes scenes appear much more interesting because they cause us to ask questions. They're going to make people spend more time with them as they try to figure them out by being less literal and not giving everything away. And yeah, it's just really fun to focus on scenes in this way and see how you can make them appear more interesting through your composition. So that's it for my presentation. Like Nick said, I have a book out, Conversations with Nature. I still have some copies left. It's almost sold out. But if you haven't purchased a copy yet and you enjoyed the photographs you saw here, and you can visit my website and take a look through the rest of my portfolio. This is the best presentation of my work that I've made so far. And a lot of people have really enjoyed this book, so I'm sure you will too. I also make tutorial videos regularly. I have a tutorial series that focuses on the tools and techniques that I use in post-processing. That covers things like luminosity masks, dodging and burning, improving visual flow, removing distractions, print preparation, color theory, all the things that I do in my post-processing, I show in my tutorial videos. And I have a lot of different videos that cover all different kinds of subjects. And then I also have another series called Essential Theory, which covers more things like I've shared with you tonight, like creating compositions that are more interesting, that have better visual flow. And it goes over things like balance and enhancing mood and things like that. And then also how to best use lighting and all the different qualities of light that are available to you throughout the day, different things you can do with them. So you'll have a lot of ideas when you go out into the field next time. And that series is more focused on how to take a great image in the field. And then the other series is about how to take it a step further and enhance those things that you've captured in post-processing, which is super important as well. I also regularly host critique groups, which are small group sessions of just about 5 to 7 people. And I do these on my own as well as with other professional photographers in the landscape photography community. This year, I've done them with David Thompson, William Neal, Alex Noriega, Hans Strawn, Sarah Marino, Richard Martin, Adam Gibbs, Jennifer Renwick, Rachel Talabar, and many more. And I'm going to continue to be doing these all through next year as well, with a lot of these same photographers that will be returning, as well as many new photographers that I've invited and scheduled. So you can find these sessions on my website. They sell out very quickly. Every single session is sold out so far. So if you want to be the first one to hear about them, you can subscribe to my newsletter. I always announce them there first, and many times they sell out before I even announce them anywhere else on social media. So if you're interested in that, I would highly recommend it. I currently have one session that's listed that has one spot open still, and that is a fall color theme session with my good friend and mentor, David Thompson. And this session is going to focus on not only things like how you can improve the composition of your scene or maybe work with the lighting a little bit better, but also it's going to be heavily focused on color, because when it comes to fall photography, I feel like color balance and color management can be one of the most difficult things, handling that saturation, getting nice warm and cool color contrast, not having color casts. So me and David are going to be using Photoshop to demonstrate the changes that we would suggest for your photos that you enter. And I feel like this one's going to be really beneficial and full of lots of good techniques and things you can take away. David Thompson is really great at post-processing and has taught me a lot of what I know, and it's helped a lot of people as well. And I feel like he's a master of color. So there's still one spot open for this session. If you'd like to sign up for that, you can find it on my website under the critique group tab. And that's it for now. So we can move on to questions. Nick, if you want to help me facilitate that.
Sure. Yeah, we have no shortage of them right now for sure. Both in the chat and some very positive things in the chat, Eric, as you've been talking. Let's see, what did we get all the way through? What an inspiring session. We'll order Eric's book today. All right, good. Love this presentation. Guys. You're able to put more of yourself and your feelings in the image. Wonderful. Thanks, Nick, for introducing me to Eric. Inspiring creativity through exclusion. Thank you for a great presentation. Wonderful. I like this one too. This is a wonderful approach to make a capture as a piece of art. Thank you so much. And they kind of just go on and on, people singing your praises on your books, etc. So those are certainly good things to have all the way through about the inspirations. Eric's website is bennettfilm.com. We'll put some chat links in there, and it'll also have a lot of stuff in there. Oh, sorry, somebody already put it in there. We're good. Oh, books have been ordered, so you're in good shape. But a lot of the questions that came in, one that kind of ties in a little bit to your tail end, which we'll kind of start there and go up, is in-field workshops, which we talked about at the beginning. You're not going to be doing the smaller sessions as much as you're going to be doing some of the other things. So do you want to talk about out of Chicago or any of the other ones?
Well, I'm doing out of Oregon. I got to take off on Sunday, and I'll be doing week 1 and 2. Week 2 still has a few open spots, but out of Olympic that I'm doing next year, that's completely sold out. So
is it already? Okay.
Yeah. Sold out in like 24 hours.
Hard guy to get a hold of. So no infield workshops. We do have a couple questions about cropping. Do you generally try to crop in camera was one of the questions. How much cropping do you do? What do you feel, or how do you feel about cropping? As a question, I think is a really great question.
It is. And I feel like before, many years ago when I would shoot stuff, once I would open it up into Camera Raw or Photoshop, I'd play around with different crops to see if I can make it look better. Somehow maybe salvage an image by cropping in more. Now I would say I compose in the field without including anything unnecessary. So just like I stressed here, I always only include what I need and I exclude everything else. So I heavily focus on exclusion already while I'm shooting. So the only time I crop is when I shoot with Sony, and unfortunately I can't change the crops while I'm shooting. So I have to envision them. But through experience, I can kind of tell like how big 4x5 is rather than 2x3 or like 1x1, stuff like that. So if I ever do crop, it's something that I've already foreseen in the field while creating the image. It's never really an afterthought or a way to try to salvage a scene or fix something. I feel like the best thing you can do is frame it in a way that everything is right according to the ratio that you're shooting in, or if you're able to change ratios, I would highly recommend that. I know like Nikon cameras have a lot of different ratios. Canon has a couple. That's what I would do if I could, but instead I have to like preconceive it while I'm shooting and kind of imagine what I'm going to be cropping out to fit that ratio later on.
So kind of a follow-up, which is a couple of the questions too, is related to, you talked about using your telephoto, using some of your other, mid-range lenses, and your gravitation away from the wide angle. What would you say, is there, a general go-to, without getting into the technical portions, but a general kind of go-to focal length or range that you like more for the isolation and the exclusion of what you're working with?
So I own like 5 lenses, but I usually only go out with 2 of them. And the main one I shoot probably, or have shot 95% of my portfolio with, is my 70-300. And, from 70 to 300, that's a pretty big range. So that's why it's my favorite lens, and it's kind of compact, so I can take it backpacking. And honestly, I couldn't tell you. I shoot a lot of stuff at 70. I shoot a ton of stuff at 300. And I shoot a lot of stuff in between. So it's hard to tell you like a specific number, but definitely most of my portfolio is created within that range.
Yeah. Well, it gives us perspective. I mean, I can tell you that Mark's go-to lenses is 14 to 24 wide angle.
Right.
He gravitates towards the grand landscapes and, enlarging the foregrounds and working with that. So it's obviously for you, it's a different thing. And I think Sarah's go-to is her 70 to 200. So yeah, so we're in that range.
Yeah, the main thing is I never go out expecting to take any certain kind of scene. So if you looked at my portfolio, I do have a lot of grand landscapes as well. I always just let the scene dictate how I photograph it. So that's gonna decide what lens I use, where I stand, how close or how far back I get, just what the scene requires. Sometimes you got to go wide to include some more things, or depending on the scale of the subject. Other times you got to really zoom in and magnify those details. So
yeah,
that's what it comes down to. I don't try to like confine myself to any certain kind of photography. I really don't even consider myself like an intimate scene photographer, even though my portfolio is, it happens to be dominated by those kinds of scenes. I still love grand landscapes and stuff like that. It's just, I tend to find more of the small stuff because it relies less on incredible lighting than the wide stuff. So
yeah. Well, your grand landscapes
together.
are, I mean, I own only a handful of prints from other photographers, and one of which adorns the master bedroom of the Wind Rivers. And that illustration of the grand landscape scene there is absolutely fantastic. Questions keep coming in. We got plenty of time, so keep firing them in. We got lots of time for questions. Do you use any specific lighting for any close-up shots?
Any specific lighting? No, again, so I tend to pay attention to what the lighting is doing first and then figure out ways that I can work with that. So I'm never trying to plan certain kinds of lighting. Unless it's like mountains where it's like east facing or west facing, it's like, okay, I'm going to be shooting it in the morning when it's getting hit by light, or in the evening when it's getting hit by light, because I don't want it to be flat and dark. For the most part, whatever kind of lighting happens to be occurring, I work with that and I see what I can make with that. So then I start to find compositions in areas that lighting is interacting with, or if there's very soft light, like it's an overcast day, or there's a lot of shade, I'll shoot scenes that don't depend on high contrast. Like the scene behind me as my background, it's this fall scene. There's already this natural contrast of the yellow and blue from the yellow leaves and the blue shady background. I didn't need sunlight or intense light to create extra contrast or anything like that. So a lot of the time I use soft light because that's the most available lighting. It's the most common kind of lighting, just a cloudy day or in the shade. And detailed scenes, pattern scenes, a lot of times like the more simple stuff works with that, because pronounced lighting can make it overly complex and kind of too busy and messy. So
yeah,
but yeah, there's not really any kind of specific lighting I stick to or anything like that.
Yeah, you don't. So basically, I think to the degree, and I can't say for certain, they're possibly asking, are you lighting your scene with flash or anything else? And
oh yeah, no, I never.
Yeah.
The only time I ever do anything like that is maybe if I shade the scene with my body.
Yep. Which is always a fun trick to do.
Yeah.
Great questions as well coming in. How much natural talent does one need to see the way you do?
I don't know. It's something that I would say happens automatically, and I've learned how to articulate it for others to hopefully help them. If they want to learn to not necessarily photograph like I do, but everybody can use these techniques in different ways. And so it's something that develops over time. I feel like the best thing you can do is spend lots and lots of time in nature, observing different subjects. I've been to a lot of places. I spend a lot of time backpacking, camping, first and foremost, not for photography, but because I just love being outside. And so I'm always looking at stuff. I'm always just amazed by the world around me. And I'm just closely observing everything, different qualities of light. You're going to learn how to recognize nuances and lighting and intricacies like that. So I think it's something that develops over time. Just spend a lot of time, even without your camera, looking at stuff. And I think that's going to refine a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we completely agree on that. I think Eric's, I don't think it's a natural talent thing as much for him as that slowing down and that continued cultivation and analysis of his work. So I participated in one of his critique sessions with Hans Strand. It was a fantastic opportunity he's an icon. He's the icon of Europe. to hear his ways of work. And Eric's philosophy continues to come through a lot in his learnings and his teachings and his writings as well. And that's, I think he would agree that you can cultivate a way of seeing. It isn't like he woke up one day and was like, oh my God, I just see this way. So he definitely.
Yeah, like I mentioned in the beginning, I wasn't shooting how I do now from the very beginning. It's something that has developed slowly over time. You have realizations and things, but I think most of that has come from the relationship I have with nature by spending prolonged amounts of time outside.
Yeah. Another question came in from Diana saying she's going to Antarctica. I don't know if she's proposing to hire to take you with her as her personal guide, but she wants to know, do you have any tips or books on photographing glaciers? And I think this also can be applied towards snow photography for a lot of us as well. So,
yeah, I've never been to Antarctica. That's nice of you, Diana.
Yeah,
that's like the last place on my like sort of bucket list. Like somewhere I definitely need to go before I die. So hopefully in the future I'll be able to go. But when it comes to photographing glaciers and snow, I feel like a lot of the time I purposely underexpose them because the snow can get very bright and stuff when you're shooting it in the field, just to make sure I don't lose any details or anything like that. But I feel like one of the main things when processing snow scenes is to get the white balance right. You don't want to be super cool or super warm. You want to find that nice neutral spot where the snow looks white instead of yellow or blue. And then also like a more high key approach, like keeping the contrast low. I don't think pumping in a lot of contrast looks nice or natural with snowy scenes. I feel like it looks a lot better to go a lot brighter and have the shadows a lot more open. Also, like photographing snow in soft light tends to look a lot better than direct light for the most time. For the most part, I would say, but that all depends on the scene as well. Sometimes you need that direct light to really make certain areas pop out or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think she just saw like using a polarizer. I don't really use a polarizer on snow. I wouldn't say that really makes a huge difference.
How much in the rest of your images?
I mainly use it when I'm in like a green forest and it's really wet and you get those like white bits of glare on the leaves. Polarizer will get rid of that really nicely. Sometimes like on waterfall scenes where you get like the reflected like white glare on the surface of the water, I'll use that. Yeah, not super often.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it can make like skies look super weird, so I don't really use it on wide angle scenes.
Yeah, fair enough. So the natural landscapes photography contest, it was a response to a lot of the manipulated images that you see out there and a lot of the other stuff as well. Can you share with the group any of your, I mean, being selected as that one is obviously a huge honor, but what drew you to enter that contest and that kind of part and piece of your work?
I just wanted to support it because I felt like it was a contest that had good values for once, values that I also hold for my own photography. So it finally felt like, even though I didn't submit my images with the intention of winning or anything like that, I just wanted to show my support because obviously if people don't enter their images, the competition isn't going to be able to stick around for years to come. So I wanted to support it so that it would stick around because I feel like it's a lot more reputable and respectable than other competitions that are out there. And I felt like my images would actually be judged based on things that I value myself as well. So that's an important thing. It felt a lot more relevant than any other competition in the past has. So can't really give you any pointers on winning or anything like that because I really didn't expect that and I wasn't trying to win, but it was a pleasant
submit
surprise.
$100 bills with your entries. No, your work stands up for it. And I don't think people were looking for pointers as much as it just that philosophy. The Epson Panel Awards came out this morning, and I went through them briefly, and it was a lot of the same that you've seen time and time again.
Yeah, or it can be like all over the place,
and distortions.
Like, yeah, a lot of composite stuff or just things that aren't really even in the same like playing field.
Yeah,
doesn't make sense to compare them to one another.
Yeah. So can you talk to us at all about your next book? What's coming up there? What's going to more continuations of the conversations with nature or same type of organization?
I'm still holding off on sharing any specific details about it, like the subject matter or anything like that. But it will be roughly the same size as Conversations with Nature, same amount of pages. I want it to look nice next to it on the shelf, so same dimensions and all that. And if you liked Conversations with Nature, it's just going to be more of that. So
great.
I think you'll enjoy it as well. It's going to be a lot more personal, a lot more focused, and it is all unreleased work. So that's something
cool.
I'm super excited about. None of these images have been seen by anyone before. Been saving them for this book, especially.
That's great. Well, you had great intros in the book from William Neal, and also from Alex Noriega, and those two individuals know a lot about working with the soft light and the landscapes and everything else there too. They wrote very nice intros for you, so it's good to see. I'm gonna show a couple quick things, and then we'll have probably about 10 minutes left, actually more than that, for more questions. So keep firing them in as we go through, but it's actually going to be quite quick to go through. So let me start this.
Yeah, keep them coming, guys. I'm happy to answer.
Yeah. So I'm just going to talk about the upcoming next couple speakers for those of you that aren't registered. I'll move this over so we can make extra sure not to have blocks. So, okay. So this is the second of the speaker series. So Mark Adamus spoke last week. For those of you that this is the first time you've been part of the speaker series, you can actually register, and I'll send out a link tomorrow for the entire series, and you'll get the credit for Eric's registration today, and you can watch Mark's recording in addition to everybody else going forward. So I'm really excited, obviously, about spending time with Eric. He's had a profound impact on my work and how I view it, but also to be able to spend time with a lot of these other people. So Alistair Benn is going to be coming to us from Scotland. He's going to talk about understanding the landscape, the emotional language of vision. And Alistair has just put out a new book that will hit in, I think, February. It'll be shipped, or January. And I got a preview of it. It's called Out of Darkness. Absolutely spectacular imagery and his own personal journey all the way through. And then Canon's Explorer of Light, Erin Bobnick. She's got her PhD in art history, I believe. So she has a really good understanding of colors and a lot of that balancing of artistry and technique. So she'll be coming to us first week in November, I think. And then Josh Cripps. Probably many of you have seen him in the landscapes or his YouTube videos as well. But he's going to talk a lot about the gravitation away from iconic locations, his own personal journey. Guy Tall will then be speaking. He's definitely the most prolific writer. He only is giving, this is only his second presentation of the year, creativity and expression in photography. He is stopping doing presentations, but Guy's a friend of mine. So I'm glad to have him in here. And then ending with Sarah Moreno and Miss Small Scenes, but she also is just a fantastic educator. So these are only $10 per speaker, or you can get the whole rest of the series if you haven't registered already for $60. So it's going to be very similar to today, about an hour-long presentation, 30 minutes of questions, great opportunity to connect with these individuals and taking time out. And then the only other thing I'll mention, so nature photography classes, I have a whole bunch of tutorials, a whole lot of different topics and things about light and understanding post-processing, et cetera. But I also teach live classes, and the next class I'm teaching is on October 26th. It's called Preparing Your Images for Print. This is my most popular class. It's only $35. You'll see information on the website. You can either QR scan this or go directly to the website. It comes with about $70 worth of print credits plus a workflow, print workflow, and a whole bunch of other materials. So this is a really valuable part of my process. And with that, that's all I needed to say on those particular things. So
where's that photo from, Nick? That's pretty epic.
What's that? Oh, this one?
Your background, yeah. Yeah,
that's from I didn't even send this one to you. This one looks different on this screen than it does on the actual print, but I printed it. It's called the Lake Basin up in
the Sierra Mountains.
Yeah, it's the central part of the Sierra. It's called the Lake Basin. This is Cartridge Creek. And yeah, it was it was one of those days of just almost speechlessness for sure. So
yeah, some awesome dappled light there.
Yeah, unbelievable. And the only problem is we ran out of food, but so I sent out my calendar today. It was kind of funny. to my print newsletter subscribers that purchased my prints, and one of the guys on there is my backpacking partner. He literally wrote on that particular picture, "No food in this basin." So yeah, but that's what happens when you exert for 8 days up in the high Sierra. But great stuff. All right, so maybe we got a couple more questions that chatted in. Yep, we do. So
yeah, and thanks everybody for being so kind with all the compliments and stuff in the chat. I really appreciate it. Glad you enjoyed the presentation, and
yeah,
hopefully you enjoy my book and tutorial videos if you check those out. Would love to see you in a critique group.
Yeah, they're all great stuff. So so we got a couple more questions that did come in, which is good. I want to give people time to think about stuff. How much do you use focus stacking for those detailed images? Do you use bracketing or GND? I think graduated neutral density at all as well. I think focus stacking, yeah, for sure. It's a interesting.
So admittedly, I consider myself to be a sort of lazy photographer when it comes to technical stuff. I only use more complex techniques when I absolutely have to. So a lot of my intimate stuff is not focus stacked. It's shot at like f22, sometimes even f32, which on my telephoto lens is still pretty sharp. A lot of people worry about diffraction, but I haven't seen anything, any kind of negative results from that. But I mainly only use focus stacking when I'm super zoomed in, shooting something maybe a little bit further away where I can't look straight down at it. So a lot of it is like a really angled plane, and it's not all going to be, you're not going to be able to focus on all of it in the same exposure. So that's when I'll do focus stacking, like maybe some ice or something, or when you got to get far away to get like reflected light in something, or get a certain kind of reflection in an intimate scene. Stuff like that, I'll do some focus stacking, but it's pretty rare, I would say.
Okay.
Not always necessary.
Yeah.
Just double check on the back of your screen. I always just shoot, zoom in, and go from top to bottom and make sure it's sharp. Otherwise, I'll focus stack as much as I need to.
How about bracketing? How often do you bracket?
Never.
Yeah. So you're exposing to the left or exposing to the right, I guess we call it. But yeah, you really have shown me a lot about how you can open up your shadows and use that full dynamic range.
Yeah, I just shoot as bright as I can without blowing out the highlights at all, because those are much more difficult to recover. I like to leave the light intact, and I'd rather work with the shadows, opening them up and manipulating them, because once you start messing with the light, it can look really strange and lose that feeling of real light in the scene.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, we do have some Canadian compadres up north, and we had a question come through on, do you ship your books to Canada?
Yeah, I ship them all around the world. Shipping to Canada isn't too bad. Of course, you guys have like taxes and extra fees sometimes, the import fees, but yeah, it's kind of expensive everywhere else in the world, unfortunately. No way around that. You can order multiple copies, and the shipping's about the same, so you do save on that. But yeah, I'll ship to Canada for sure.
Great. All right. Well, we're getting close to time, but we do have a little bit of time for any final questions. I know it's Friday night. Some of you are out there on the East Coast probably wanting to settle in for some Netflix or whatever else. Eric's getting ready for his evening beer, I guess, and I'm going to go walk the dog. But last chance for any final questions, and then otherwise we'll sign off, and I'll send the materials out to you guys tomorrow with the video and any of the other stuff, including some links. And then I just want to say, once again, thanks, Eric, for coming out and inspiring the crew in a lot of different ways. Hopefully, a lot of you guys are going to find a lot of inspiration in Eric's writing and Eric's work and the way he approaches the landscape, so which is great. So,
yeah, glad to see a lot of you guys are excited to go out and shoot now. That's the whole point of it. Sometimes the lighting, the conditions, they all come together and they do a lot of the work for you. They create a scene that is inherently amazing, but photography is a lot more fun when you're able to create something special and unique and remarkable regardless of the conditions. And that's what I've hoped to be able to share with you guys today. That's what I was hoping you could take away from this, and maybe not write off those more ordinary lighting conditions or blue sky days or cloudy days, and realize all the possibilities that are out there for you.
Yeah, no, it's great. One of the ones I wrote down was just great. Make the viewer ask questions versus giving them the answer. I was like, that's money. Yeah,
that'll change a lot for you.
Yeah, it's the subtlety that can go into the images. And as we examine some of our, the images we have in our portfolios or we're working towards adding or achieving, for me, it's not the obvious landscapes as much anymore as it is the ones that are asking those questions. And I think a lot of the images you had, that's the thing I would say is they did an excellent job of really bringing home and driving home the concepts of what is this? What am I looking at? What am I intrigued with? What am I gravitating towards within there? So well done, which is great.
No more questions, guys. I'm not in a rush. Feel free to ask.
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
Don't see them. I think we're dropping down a little on numbers, but I think it's a Friday. It's the first time we've done something on Friday, and it was good registration, fairly good attendance. So I do appreciate people coming out. And otherwise, we'll give you 5 extra minutes to go play with your growing family, and we'll see you around, Eric.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All
Thanks
right.
for having me again.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the other sessions that are coming up.
Yeah.
Alistair Ben's next week or a couple weeks.
He's on the 22nd, day before my birthday. So it's my birthday present this year.
Day before your birthday?
Yeah.
You're October 23rd?
Yeah.
That's my birthday.
No way.
Yeah.
That's too funny. Well, at least I'll be able to wish you a happy birthday. So.
Oh yeah, and I appreciate you sending the book. I've been reading it and I really enjoy it.
Oh, good. Yeah, Mountains of the Mind. I'm working on my book summary on that one right now. I'm probably gonna do a blog post on it. It's you'll love it. I mean, as you're getting through it too. So
yeah, I'm like halfway through it. I like it a lot.
Well, good. So
thanks.
All right, perfect. See you all. Thanks. Take care.
Take it easy, guys.
Bye.
Glad you enjoyed the presentation.